The wild can turn deadly in seconds, no matter how prepared you think you are. From camps crushed by furious grizzlies to hunters trapped by charging moose and boars, these stories prove nature strikes fast and without warning. From fog-covered mountain ridges to frozen forests where tigers lurk unseen, every step can shift from calm to chaos. Even motorhomes, rooftops, and blinds offer no safety when apex predators close in. Each moment shows how thin the line is between control and pure survival in the wilderness. Watch till the end. In September 2025, deep in the wild forests of Russia's Amur region, 3 experienced hunters prepared for a late-season wild boar trip. The land around them was dense with spruce fog and soft ground shaped by countless streams. It was a place known for heavy rains, thick underbrush, and the presence of some of the largest grizzlies in the world. The hunters, Vladimir Sokolov, Igor Petrenko, and Mikhail Abramov, had traveled many hours across rough tracks to reach a quiet creek where they could set up their camp. Vladimir, 52, had spent most of his life in remote areas. He was respected for his calm nature and careful planning. Years of tracking elk, boar, and bear had taught him how important steady judgment was in lonely forests. Beside him, Igor Petrenko, 48, was strong and skilled at handling heavy gear. He had worked as a mechanic before turning to full-time hunting, which made him confident with vehicles and tools. The youngest in the group was Mikhail Abramov, 39, eager and determined, known for his patience during long hunts and his ability to move quietly through difficult terrain. The men parked a large motorhome near the edge of a fog-covered creek. This vehicle served as their shelter, kitchen, and supply center. Rifles were placed near the entrance, including a .375H and H, and a .338 Lapua Magnum. Coolers held food, bait, and smoked meat for the days ahead. They also kept baited scraps outside near a table, planning to use the scent to draw boars into clearings. Though the hunters understood the risks of leaving food outdoors in bear country, they expected their camp setup to withstand the night. Thick fog surrounded the motorhome as evening settled. The forest grew darker with each passing hour, and the sound of water flowing through the creek mixed with the soft rustle of trees. The hunters finished their final tasks and prepared to rest for the next day's work. Nothing seemed unusual, but the smell of cooked game drifted across the still air. Hidden within the fog, a massive male grizzly moved quietly through the spruce. The bear had struggled through a difficult season, with food growing scarce as summer ended. The scent of meat carried across the creek and drew the animal closer. The powerful predator approached without making a sound, its paws sinking into soft moss as it neared the edge of the camp. Just after midnight, the bear reached the vehicle. Without warning, it rose on its hind legs and slammed its full weight into the motorhome's metal side. The impact shook the walls, sending supplies falling inside. Windows cracked, hinges bent, and the entire frame groaned under the force. Inside, Igor and Mikhail were thrown off balance as glass scattered around them. Vladimir and 2 assistants rushed toward the rear as the motorhome shook again under the second blow. The attack had begun and escape was already slipping away. The motorhome shook again as the massive grizzly drove its shoulder into the metal wall. A sharp crack spread across one of the windows before the glass collapsed inward. The bear pushed its head through the broken frame, sending cold air, fog, and splintered pieces across the small interior space. Igor and Mikhail, trapped near the front, had no room to move. The animal forced itself deeper, claws tearing at seats, cabinets, and anything within reach. Another violent hit crushed part of the outer structure. The metal bent inward, pinning Igor against a storage shelf. Deep wounds spread across his torso as the bear struck repeatedly. Mikhail tried to reach a rifle, but the collapsing side section blocked his arm. The predator's weight pushed further into the motorhome, and heavy claws tore through the narrow space. Within moments, both hunters suffered grave injuries, unable to break free. The damage around them grew too severe, and the confined space offered no protection from the attacking bear. At the rear, Vladimir managed to reach the broken back door with two assistants who had been setting up gear outside earlier. The three men slipped through the shattered opening as the vehicle leaned from the repeated impacts. Mud and wet earth met their boots as they scrambled into the fog. Bruises marked their arms and legs from falling debris. The sound of tearing metal chased them as they moved away from the motorhome. The bear turned its attention toward the supplies scattered outside. Coolers rolled across the ground as the predator swiped at them. Containers burst open, sending scraps into the wet dirt. The grizzly circled the camp, knocking over fuel cans and crushing gear beneath its weight. Vladimir and the others fired warning shots into the night, the flashes briefly lighting the fog. The shots startled the bear, but hunger kept it circling a moment longer. Finally, after several tense minutes, the enormous predator retreated toward the forest. Its heavy steps faded into the dark as it disappeared between the spruce trees. Silence settled slowly around the ruined camp. Vladimir and the assistants returned to the leaning motorhome, finding the interior destroyed and their companions beyond help. The shock of the scene held them still, the cold fog wrapping around their shoulders. By morning, they gathered what little remained and waited for rescue crews. The survivors carried bruises, cuts, and a heavy sense of loss, knowing the attack was one of the deadliest the region had seen. The memory of the night stayed with them, a harsh reminder that even strong vehicles can fail when a starving Amur grizzly decides to strike. In November 2023, the remote Carpathian Mountains in Romania stood cold, misty, and rugged as winter approached. The long ridges, deep valleys, and thick forests created a landscape both beautiful and unforgiving. Hunters Mihai Popescu, Andrei Ionescu, and Stefan Vasilescu traveled into this wild region with plans to track wild boar and red deer before heavy snow settled across the range. All three men had years of experience in the outdoors, but each brought different strengths that helped them work as a team. Mihai, 39, had grown up near the edge of the Carpathians. His childhood was spent learning trails, plant types, and weather patterns from older relatives. Over time, he became skilled at reading tracks and understanding animal behavior. Andrei, 41, worked as a forestry guide and often led groups through steep terrain. He could navigate dense woods, plan safe paths, and recognize changes in the forest that signaled risk. Stefan, 36, was known for his calm mind and steady pace. He enjoyed studying local plants and mushrooms, giving him knowledge that was useful during long hunts far from towns. With rifles, packs of dried food, and camping gear, the three men entered the mountains under gray skies. The air felt damp and heavy as thick fog floated through fir and beech trees. Early rain from previous days had swollen streams, turning narrow paths muddy and slick. The hunters expected difficult travel, but they trusted their skills and equipment to guide them as they moved deeper into the forest. As they climbed, fog thickened, making visibility drop quickly. The forest canopy blocked most satellite signals, causing their GPS devices to lose accuracy. When another burst of rain swept across the mountains, their maps became soaked and nearly unreadable. They continued onward, hoping to find familiar landmarks, but steep slopes and twisting ravines made each direction look the same. Hours passed before the group realized they had drifted far off course. The situation grew serious. They could no longer see the trail behind them, and the nearest village was miles away through unknown terrain. The cold air settled sharply at dusk, and the forest grew darker with every minute. Mihai, Andrei, and Stefan gathered fallen branches and spare tarps to create a simple shelter for the night. They rationed dried meat and nuts, saving as much as possible in case the search lasted longer than expected. Rainwater collected on leaves and plastic sheets gave them something to drink, but hunger and exhaustion set in quickly. The forest around them felt endless, with tall trunks and thick undergrowth creating narrow spaces to move. By the second day, the group tried to backtrack, but every ridge and slope looked nearly identical through the fog. Their boots sank into wet earth, and the rising cold made their fingers stiff. Late on the third day, as the hunters prepared a small fire, shadows moved in the trees around them. A pack of wolves approached, drawn by the scent of smoke and food. Their shapes circled near the flickering flames, watching cautiously. The danger in the dark was growing, and the hunters braced themselves for a long night in the mountains. The wolves moved closer in the dim light as the fire crackled weakly. Their glowing eyes shifted between the trees, studying the men and the small shelter. Mihai and Andrei grabbed metal cups and branches, striking them together to make loud sounds. Stefan added more wood to the flames, hoping the heat and bright sparks would slow the animals. After several tense minutes, the wolves backed away, fading slowly into the forest. The night remained restless, with distant howls rising and falling as the hunters tried to stay awake. Morning brought cold fog and stiff limbs. The group packed what little they had left before moving downhill. Their bodies felt drained from limited food and long hours in wet conditions. Stefan slipped on slick rocks while crossing a narrow slope, twisting his ankle and collapsing into the mud. Pain spread through his leg, and he struggled to stand. Mihai and Andrei made a splint from straight sticks and cloth strips, securing it firmly before helping him continue at a slow pace. Progress became difficult. The forest floor was slippery, and thick roots created constant tripping hazards. They leaned on branches for support, stopping often to rest. Hunger pressed harder each hour, forcing them to search for any safe plants they recognized. Stefan pointed out edible roots beneath soft soil, while Mihai located mushrooms that he knew would not cause harm. These small finds gave them short bursts of strength, but not enough to move quickly. Rain returned on the fourth evening, soaking their clothing and chilling their bodies. They set up another small shelter using fallen branches and wet tarps, curling close together for insulation. Each man felt the weight of uncertainty as darkness settled again. The wind carried the sound of cracking limbs, but no animals approached the campsite that night. Despite exhaustion, they continued to plan their next steps, determined to find a way back to safety. By the fifth day, their pace slowed to a steady crawl. Fog lifted slightly and patches of sunlight reached the forest floor. As they moved along a ridge, distant shapes appeared between the trees. Bright vests and tools glinted in the light. Local foresters had been searching the valley after receiving reports of missing hunters. Relief spread through the group as rescuers approached quickly. The foresters supported Stefan, gave the others water, and guided them toward a service path. All three men were bruised, scraped, dehydrated, and exhausted, but alive. The long days of fear and effort left them deeply aware of the risks hidden in the Carpathian wilderness. Their survival came from relying on each other, using every skill they knew, and never giving up through the harsh and uncertain days in the mountains. In September 2024, the wild landscape of Kodiak Island stretched in every direction. filled with steep hills, cold winds, and dense forests leading toward roaring rivers. The island was known for its massive bears and harsh terrain, attracting hunters from around the world. Among those visitors were 3 experienced hunters: Jake Lawson, Maggie Reynolds, and Ethan Brooks. All 3 had spent years traveling across Alaska, learning how to move through rough ground and unpredictable weather. Jake, 39, grew up near Anchorage and had been hunting since he was young. He learned early how to track game across snow-covered slopes and rocky trails. His calm attitude helped him handle stressful moments, and he often guided friends on long wilderness trips. Maggie, 34, had come from a small town in Colorado. She was known for her steady aim and her ability to stay focused even when storms rolled in. Her trips often involved long days watching river bends for signs of movement. Ethan, 41, had worked for many years as a wilderness guide, showing newcomers how to prepare camps, follow tracks, and stay safe around bears. Together, they planned a late-season hunt on Kodiak Island. Since the ground around the cabin was wet, icy, and scattered with snow, they decided to build a small rooftop camp on top of the cabin. The raised space kept them away from melting ice on the ground and gave them a clear view of nearby slopes. They stacked their rifles, a .338 Winchester Magnum and a .375 H&H, close to their sleeping bags. Food crates filled with salmon and supplies sat on one side of the roof, held in place by wooden boards. A small cooking setup left behind a faint smell of smoke and fish. The island was quiet at night, except for distant waves and wind pushing through the trees. The hunters settled in under a dark sky, unaware of the movement growing within the forest below. Kodiak bears often wandered through the area during early fall, following the strong scent of fish drifting from rivers and camps. One giant bear, driven by hunger and the smell of salmon, moved steadily toward the cabin. Sometime before dawn, the stillness broke. Heavy claws scraped against the logs below, followed by a deep thud as the bear reached the cabin's edge. The massive animal lifted its weight and climbed, gripping the sides with ease. The roof trembled as the creature hauled itself upward. Wooden planks cracked under the pressure, sending loose gear sliding. Jake woke first as a crate shattered beside him. A powerful swipe tore through the boards, pinning him under broken wood. Sharp claws raked across his back and shoulder, leaving deep wounds. Maggie and Ethan jumped up, grabbing loose boards to shield themselves as the bear moved across the roof, growling loudly. The rooftop shook with every strike. Boxes toppled, planks split, and the wind carried dust into the cold air. The bear stayed close, testing each step, and the danger continued to rise with every second that passed. The roof continued to shake as the huge Kodiak bear shifted its weight, pressing down with enough force to bend weakened planks. Maggie and Ethan held their makeshift shields close, stepping carefully around broken boards while trying to move closer to Jake. The bear swept its paw again, sending loose wood sliding across the rooftop. A long crack formed under one of the support beams, warning that the entire structure could give way if the animal stayed much longer. Maggie reached Jake first and pulled away the splintered crate trapping him. His back and shoulder bled heavily from deep scratches, and bruises formed rapidly across his skin. Ethan gripped a nearby flare, striking it hard to create a bright burst of light. The sudden color lit the air, casting sharp shadows across the bear's face. The predator paused, lowering its head as it studied the strange glow. Seizing the brief moment, Ethan moved closer and fired a warning shot into the air. The echo rolled across the trees below, startling birds from the branches. The bear shifted back, confused by the noise and the flare's burning trail. Maggie waved another board, pushing herself between Jake and the advancing claws, staying just out of reach as she backed toward the edge of the roof. The air filled with smoke, splinters, and the pounding of heavy steps. The bear snarled once more, testing the roof with a final push, but the combined noise, movement, and flare light finally broke its focus. It stepped back toward the side of the cabin and climbed down, vanishing into the shadows of the forest. Leaves rustled as the massive shape disappeared among dark trunks and tangled brush, leaving the hunters standing on the broken rooftop in stunned silence. Maggie and Ethan helped Jake sit up, checking his wounds before guiding him carefully toward the cabin entrance. The roof was unstable, so they moved slowly, avoiding broken beams and sharp wood. Once inside, they cleaned his cuts and wrapped his injuries, working through the early hours with steady hands as the wind pushed against the cabin walls. By sunrise, the scene on the roof showed clear signs of the violent struggle. Torn planks, scattered crates, and claw marks etched deep into the wood. The hunters knew how close the night had come to ending in disaster. The attack left them shaken, but alive, each one aware that even elevated shelters provided no true barrier against Kodiak bears seeking food. The experience served as a lasting reminder of the wild power that controlled the island far more than any human plan or structure ever could. In February 2024, the Black Forest in Germany lay under a thick blanket of snow, its dense trees stretching across steep hills and narrow valleys. The air was cold and still, and the early morning fog hung low between pines, turning familiar paths into risky ground. 3 hunters moved slowly along these trails, relying on years of shared experience to guide them through the winter landscape. Lucas Schneider, 38, grew up near the forest's edge. He had spent much of his life learning how to track deer, boars, and birds through the region's twisting terrain. His steady nature made him a dependable hunting partner, and he carried a .308 Winchester slung securely across his back. Beside him walked Matthias Vogel, 41, known for his strength and calm habits during difficult hunts. Matthias worked as a carpenter in a nearby town, and the forest had always been his escape from busy routines. He carried a .30-06 Springfield, the same rifle he had used for years. Following them was Jonas Keller, the youngest at 33, quick on his feet and eager to master every part of tracking. He admired both older hunters and learned from their careful planning and attention to weather, trails, and wildlife movement. The 3 men had set out early to follow a sounder of wild boars reported near the deeper woods. Snowmelt mixed with recent rain had made the ground slick. Roots, stones, and slush shifted under each step. Their boots sank into patches of mud as they examined fresh tracks pressed into the trail. Thick fog drifted in waves, sometimes clearing for a moment, then closing again like a curtain. They moved quietly, listening for the hooves and grunts that signaled nearby animals. Wild boars were common in the region, but winter often made them more unpredictable. The hunters kept their rifles ready, though slung behind them, for easier movement through tight underbrush. As they reached a narrow slope bordered by low shrubs, the forest suddenly shifted around them. Birds rose from branches in a quick burst, and a wave of snow fell from shaken limbs. Before the hunters could react, 3 massive boars burst from a cluster of bushes ahead. Each boar weighed well over 250 pounds, their bodies thick with muscle and bristle fur. Their speed was startling, hooves tearing through frozen earth as they charged without warning. The first boar crashed directly into Lucas, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling into a shallow, icy creek. Pain shot through his ribs as rocks scraped his forearm. Matthias braced himself, but the second boar rammed into him with full force, driving him into the mud and leaving deep bruises along his shoulder and leg. The third boar spun quickly toward Jonas, who scrambled onto a fallen tree trunk. His ankle twisted sharply as he climbed, while the boar's tusks flashed inches below his boot. Snow sprayed into the air as the three animals circled the hunters, testing every escape route. The forest, once quiet and familiar, had turned into a frantic trap. The three hunters stayed frozen for a moment as the boars circled them, their heavy bodies pushing through snow and mud with sharp bursts of movement. Each breath formed clouds in the cold air as fear tightened every muscle. Lucas struggled to rise from the icy creek, water soaking through his clothing and making his bruised ribs ache with each movement. His scraped arms stung from the cold stones beneath him. He pressed his hand into the bank, trying to pull himself clear before another charge reached him. Matthias forced himself onto one knee, though pain shot through his bruised shoulder and leg. Mud clung to his clothing as he steadied himself, knowing he needed to stay upright to have any chance of reacting. The boar that had struck him continued pacing back and forth, hooves carving lines across the softened ground. Its thick body blocked one of the only safe paths into the forest. Jonas gripped the fallen trunk beneath him, his twisted ankle throbbing as he tried to balance on the slick bark. The boar below him rammed its head against the log, shaking the entire structure and threatening to knock him off. Snow fell in loose clumps around him as branches snapped under the repeated impacts. He looked for a stable footing, but each shift sent more pain through his ankle. For a few long minutes, the animals circled the group with sharp turns and sudden bursts of speed. Their tusks cut through low branches, sending pieces scattering. The forest felt alive with movement, echoing grunts bouncing between trees and rolling through the fog-heavy air. Every step the hunters made had to be deliberate, as even the smallest slip could leave them exposed. Lucas finally reached a patch of fir roots and pushed himself upright, gripping a nearby trunk for support. His rifle was still secure across his back, but there was no time to unclip it. He steadied himself on the slope, trying not to draw attention from the nearest boar. The icy water left his legs numb, slowing him as he tried to move toward higher ground. Matthias reached for his weapon, bracing his bruised shoulder against the rough bark of a tree. His hands shook from the earlier blow, but he managed to steady the rifle as one boar paused at an angle that opened a narrow line of sight. Snowflakes drifted around him as he exhaled and fired a single, well-aimed shot into the ground near the animal. The explosion of sound ripped through the clearing. The boar jerked back, startled by the sharp blast. The other two animals broke their tight formation, scattering through thick underbrush in fast, unpredictable bursts. Branches snapped as the large shapes vanished deeper into the forest, leaving only a swirl of disturbed snow and churned earth behind. For several moments, the hunters stood in silence, waiting to see if the animals would return. The forest remained tense, but still. Lucas limped toward Matthias and Jonas, his soaked clothes heavy against his skin. Matthias lowered his rifle, breathing hard as he watched the fog swallow the last traces of movement. Jonas finally dropped from the fallen log, landing awkwardly but able to stand with help. All three were scraped, bloodied, and struggling to catch their breath. Their bruises throbbed under layers of wet clothing, and their hearts still pounded from the sudden chaos. Slowly, they made their way back toward the main trail, supporting one another across icy patches and uneven routes. As they left the clearing behind, they understood how quickly familiar ground could shift into danger. The forest they trusted had shown its harshest side, turning a routine winter hunt into a near-fatal scramble for survival. The memory stayed with them long after the snow settled again, reminding them that even experienced hunters could be vulnerable when nature surged without warning. In January 2021, the deep winter forests of Primorsky Krai were buried under heavy snow. The land stretched in long white valleys where thick cedar and birch trees stood like tall guardians. The cold was sharp, the wind steady, and the silence carried across frozen creeks. In this remote region, two friends prepared for a planned wild boar hunt. Oleg Ivanov, 43, had lived his whole life in the Russian Far East. He learned to track animals as a teenager and often spent long weekends exploring forest trails. His steady nature and careful habits made him confident outdoors. Alongside him was his close friend, Dmitry Morozov, 40, who shared the same love for winter hunting. Dmitry grew up in a nearby village and learned early how snow, ice, and wildlife shaped life in this rugged part of Russia. Both men carried solid experience and respected the dangers of the land. They knew how sudden storms could shift the forest and how thick fog could hide cliffs and animals. Their gear was simple but reliable. Heavy jackets, warm boots, gloves built for deep cold, and rifles prepared for long waits near frozen clearings. They often hunted together during the winter months, using blinds and natural cover to track boar trails that crossed riverbeds. On this January morning, they set up a temporary blind beside a frozen creek. The snow around the area was smooth and quiet, muffling each step they took. The air smelled of pine and cold water beneath the ice. Oleg kept watch on a clearing ahead while Dmitry scanned the tree line for any sign of movement. They knew wild boar often traveled through these parts looking for roots beneath the snow. The setup seemed calm, and the two men settled into the slow rhythm of their planned hunt. What they did not know was that a much larger predator had entered the forest stretch before them. A massive Siberian tiger, around 450 pounds and moving easily through the deep snow, patrolled the same path. With winter food scarce and natural prey difficult to find, the tiger followed scents drifting along the creek bed. The smell of game carried on the breeze guided it closer. Snow clung to its fur as it moved silently between branches. The frozen forest made everything feel still. Only the soft sound of falling flakes broke the silence. Oleg focused on the open ground ahead, unaware that the tiger was already closing the distance. Dmitry studied distant trees, cautious but calm, expecting nothing more than the usual wildlife stirring in its own rhythm. Suddenly, the tiger broke from the dense timber. Its striped body blurred through falling snow as it leaped forward with startling speed. The enormous predator lunged straight at Oleg before he had time to react. A heavy swipe struck his torso, tearing across his shoulder and ripping through his thick parka. The force sent him stumbling backward, shock spreading through him as pain surged. The attack had only begun, and both men were thrown into a moment they never expected in what should have been a routine winter hunt. Oleg fell into a shallow snowbank, the cold powder softening his landing but twisting his ankle sharply as he hit the ground. The pain shot through his leg as he tried to push himself upright, his arms trembling from the impact of the tiger's strike. The deep cuts across his torso pulsed with heat, and blood seeped into the white snow beneath him. The striped predator circled with steady steps, its breath forming small clouds that drifted through the frozen air. Snowflakes clung to its fur while it studied the men, sensing their fear and confusion. Dmitry reacted as fast as the icy ground allowed. He lifted his rifle and fired warning rounds into the sky, the cracks echoing through the silent forest. The sound caused the tiger to pause, but only for a moment. It lowered its head again and swiped at scattered gear near the blind, sending cloth and metal scraping across hardened snow. Dmitri grabbed a fallen branch, using it to push the animal back while keeping his body between the tiger and his injured friend. His boots slipped on hidden ice, forcing him to keep shifting his weight to avoid falling. The tiger continued to circle, moving with slow intent. Oleg tried to crawl backward, dragging his twisted ankle through the snow while clutching his injured shoulder. The cold pressed against his scraped skin, but the pain kept him alert. He knew every second mattered. Dmitri waved the branch and stepped forward cautiously, trying to force the predator toward the trees. The tiger growled, kicking up snow with each step. Its tail flicked sharply as it judged the distance between the two men. For several tense minutes, the scene played out in near silence. Only the heavy breathing of the hunters and the rhythmic crunch of snow under the tiger's paws broke the stillness. Fresh flakes drifted from the sky, settling on Oleg's jacket while he fought to remain conscious. Dmitri raised his arm again, swinging the thick branch to create space. Finally, the tiger stopped moving. It held its position for a long moment, watching them with steady amber eyes, then turned and walked back toward the dense timber. Its large form faded into the foggy forest, leaving a trail of deep tracks that disappeared among the trees. Dmitri rushed to Oleg's side, checking his injured friend as he knelt in the snow. Oleg's cuts were wide but not immediately life-threatening, though the blood loss and cold weakened him. His ankle was swollen, making it impossible for him to stand. Dmitri supported his weight, guiding him slowly up the slight slope toward their gear. The forest felt strangely quiet again, as if holding its breath after the violent moment had passed. Reaching the makeshift blind took time, each step slow and unsteady. Dmitri wrapped a spare coat around Oleg to retain warmth, then gathered supplies for the trip back toward their vehicle. The snow deepened as the afternoon light faded, and both men moved carefully, knowing the tiger could still be nearby. Every shadow along the frozen creek looked sharper than before, and every sound made them pause. After a long and difficult walk, they finally reached the trail leading out of the forest. Oleg leaned heavily on Dmitri as they pushed forward through the cold. Once they reached safety, help arrived to transport Oleg to medical care. His wounds required treatment and his ankle needed support, but he survived. Dmitri carried the weight of the event long after, reminded that even skilled hunters could come face to face with danger that moved silent and unseen. The frozen woods of Primorsky Krai had shown them how quickly the balance between predator and human could shift, leaving a lasting memory neither would forget. In October 2021, the early winter chill settled across the Yukon, covering the land in sheets of snow and pockets of thick fog. Along one of the high ridges north of Whitehorse, hunter Caleb Morris prepared for a long day in the cold. At 43 years old, Caleb had spent most of his life exploring wild country. Growing up in a small town near the Alaska border, he learned tracking skills from his grandfather and developed a deep respect for the animals that lived in the northern wilderness. Over the years, he became known among friends for his patience, calm nature, and steady hand with a rifle. Caleb had planned this hunt for weeks. Each autumn, he traveled alone to remote ridges where trophy bull moose often wandered during the rut. The steep slopes, thick spruce, and open valleys made perfect ground for spotting large animals. This year, he carried a strong desire to challenge himself again in difficult terrain. He packed warm layers, emergency gear, and a sturdy rifle, then selected a ridge where he had once seen several bulls moving at dawn. The morning started quietly. Fog drifted through the spruce like pale smoke, curling around broken branches and rocky ledges. Snow gathered in thick patches along the ground, hiding deep holes and slick stones. Caleb moved carefully, knowing how dangerous a misplaced step could be. He found a fallen tree at the top of the ridge and settled behind it, adjusting his camouflage clothing until he blended completely with the snowy surroundings. From this position, he could see faint shadows of animals moving through the distant trees whenever the fog thinned. Hours passed with only light wind and the soft sound of branches shifting under the weight of fresh snow. The stillness made it easy to miss signs of danger. Caleb scanned the timber again, focused on the far side of the ridge, unaware of movement shifting behind a line of spruce trees farther down the slope. A large bull moose, nearly 1,400 pounds, pushed through the dense timber with heavy steps. The animal had been startled by something behind it and was already tense. Its breath drifted in thick clouds, and frost clung to its dark coat. The moose stepped into a narrow opening, pausing as the wind changed. Caleb's camouflage made him nearly invisible in the snow, but the bull sensed a shape where it expected none. The rut season had heightened its aggression, filling it with restless energy and quick reactions. Misinterpreting the still form as a rival or hidden threat, the huge animal shifted its weight and prepared to defend its ground. Caleb noticed the movement too late. Snow shifted beneath him as he adjusted his position. The moose lowered its head, muscles tightening in a sudden burst of force. The charge began with a deep thud against the frozen ground, sending a spray of snow into the air as the massive bull thundered toward him. The ground shook as the powerful animal closed the distance, each heavy step throwing snow into the air. Caleb tried to steady himself, but the icy surface beneath him offered no support. His boots slid on a thin layer of frozen moss, sending him off balance at the worst possible moment. Before he could regain control, the enormous bull reached him with unstoppable force. The impact drove him backward into a fallen tree. Pain shot across his ribs as the rough bark dug into his side. The moose lifted its head and struck again, forcing his body deeper into the snow. Sharp branches cracked under the pressure. Caleb raised his arm to shield himself, and the force of the strike left deep bruises that spread across his forearm. The cold air rushed from his lungs as he struggled to stay conscious. Snow swirled around them as the bull spun sharply, snorting clouds of warm breath into the frozen air. Its hooves dug trenches through the soft surface, throwing loose branches across the ridge. The massive body shifted side to side, testing angles and watching for movement. Fog drifted in waves, mixing with the churned snow, making it hard for Caleb to see clearly. Every motion from the animal sent a new stab of fear through him. Caleb tried to climb backward along the fallen tree, using his elbows to drag himself across the slick surface. His chest ached with every breath, and sharp pain shot down his side where the moose had struck him. The bull circled again, lowering its head as if preparing for another charge. Caleb reached for his rifle, but the position of the weapon made it impossible to lift in time. The bull stomped the snow, kicking up a wide spray as it moved closer. Caleb knew he had only one chance to stop the attack. He grabbed the rifle barrel and pushed himself to the side, sliding across the icy ground until he reached a sturdy spruce trunk. The rough bark supported his weight as he steadied the rifle. His hands trembled from cold and fear, but he forced the barrel upward and aimed toward a tree instead of the animal. The warning shot shattered the quiet ridge. Splinters burst from the nearby trunk as the sound echoed through the fog-filled forest. The bull jerked its head up, startled by the blast. It pawed the snow, tossing clumps behind it, then took several heavy steps backward. The mist closed around the animal as it turned and pushed through dense spruce branches. Within moments, the bull vanished into the fog, leaving only churned snow and broken limbs behind. Caleb remained pressed against the spruce, breathing hard as the cold air burned his throat. His ribs pulsed with pain, and his arm throbbed from the heavy blows. Snowflakes settled on his jacket as he slowly gathered the strength to stand. Each movement sent a wave of ache through his body, but he knew he needed to leave the ridge before the moose returned, or before his injuries grew worse in the freezing weather. He followed the slope downward, using trees for balance as he made his way back toward his camp. The land felt different now, no longer calm and inviting, but unpredictable and filled with hidden danger. By the time he reached his shelter, exhaustion weighed on every step. In the days that followed, the bruises spread across his ribs and arm in deep shades of purple and blue. Each mark reminded him of how close he had come to disaster. The ridge remained untouched after the attack, and Caleb avoided returning to it. He carried the memory of the encounter with him, fully aware that, in the Yukon, even perfect camouflage and careful planning could not stop the sudden charge of a massive bull moose driven by instinct and the harsh conditions of the northern wilderness.